parking spot. A few minutes later, Officer Rolfe is on the scene, starting to question Brooks.
Your Honor, I just got something to eat. I went to visit my mother's gravesite. I'm not causing any problems.
Brooks is given a breathalyzer.
Just take a deep breath in, get your mouth over the mouthpiece, go as hard as you can until I tell you to stop. Blah, 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 stop.
The officers then give Brooks a number of other field sobriety tests, and at this point, Brooks is doing everything he's told to do. Asking if he can just walk home.
I can walk home. I don't have to
Why would you walk home?
I just don't want to be in violation of anybody. I can walk. My sister's house is right here.
Then everything changes when the officers decide to take Brooks into custody.
Think you've had too much to drink to be driving. Put your hands behind your back for me. Here, put your hands behind your back. Hey, stop fighting.
As Brooks begins to fight, there's a struggle over Officer Brosnan's taser.
You're gonna get tired.
Brooks wrestles the taser away and breaks free. Officer Rolfe gives chase with his taser in his right hand, but then, watch, he switches the taser to his left and draws his gun. Meanwhile, Brooks, while running, turns back and fires the taser he took from Brosnan at Officer Rolfe. Seconds later, Rolfe fires his handgun and Brooks falls to the ground. Brooks was taken to the hospital but died during surgery.
And again, the headline this week, no charges will be filed against Garrett Rolfe. The officers joining us this evening, the attorneys representing Garrett Rolfe, Noah Pines, Bill Thomas, and Lance LoRusso. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Noah, to you first, your reaction to the news this week, and what, if any, other information can you give us in terms of Garrett Rolfe's reaction that you can share?
I just want to start off, Ted, by saying Garrett Rolfe was never indicted. There was a part in the package where it says he was indicted. That's not accurate. He was arrested based on warrants. There's a big difference between that. So no indictment was ever presented to a grand jury. He was never indicted by a grand jury. His case was just a simple arrest, like many other people who get arrested and get their cases dismissed. We're relieved that this case is finally over for Garrett. He's relieved that this is over. This is the right decision based on the evidence in Georgia law. And Pete Skandalakis did what good prosecutors should do, which is follow the law.
How did the process work, Bill, with Skandalakis coming in? He was appointed. What, if any, information did you give him, or was he just looking at the existing information that was at his disposal?
There was very little for us to give him. The process in Georgia is that we don't have very much, if any, discovery at all prior to an indictment being returned. What happened here is he took the GBI report, which is was a very lengthy investigation that the Georgia Bureau of Investigations did. It's a thick report. I'm sure at some point you guys in the media will have access to that, and you will see the detail that was put into that, the witnesses that were interviewed, that the GBI did. He took that information. He brought in experts of his own. They reviewed video from a number of different sources, talked to experts in this area, and reached the conclusion that he did.
Lance, what do you think this turned on? What? I mean, you don't know exactly what was going on in his head, but from what you do know, what do you think made the difference here?
The law. It wasn't even a close call. It didn't even require going to Supreme Court precedent. If you look at Georgia law, and I'm sure your viewers will look it up, Georgia Code 17-4-20, when you apply the facts to the law, it was a simple case. It took a long time, and the prosecutor took his time. But, you know, it's a very interesting thing he said. He said a different situation occurred than has been portrayed by former prosecutors and other sources. And I think that's what happened. There were statements made that inflamed people unnecessarily. There were statements made that were completely inaccurate. Garrett Rolfe never kicked Rayshard Brooks. Garrett Rolfe was an honors graduate from the Atlanta Police Academy. He is one of the best and the brightest to ever graduate from that academy. He chose to work in that area. He was in the process of trying to buy a house in that community. He was portrayed as something other than what he was, which was a professional police officer who did everything he could that night to take a man into custody peacefully. And when he was violently attacked, he defended himself and then switched roles and tried to save his life.
No, the question that people ask is, well, why didn't you just let him go? Why didn't he just let him go shooting him in the back? People have an issue with that. What do you say to the criticism that your client has endured for 2 years for people that can't get their head around the simple?
Yeah, we're not going to, I mean, as a society, we don't let people who commit crimes just run away and assault police officers. That's just not the way it works. You don't get to assault a police. You don't. Ted,
you know, when someone is a high-speed chase, you give it up, right?
He punched a police officer in the face. He attempted to tase Officer Brosnan in the face. If you know, our experts, you know, we had this video footage. We took all the video footage that we could get from the GBI and from YouTube and from witnesses. We actually provided some video to Director Skandalakis. We sent it to our experts 2 years ago. It is clear that Rayshard Brooks attempted to fire a taser at Devin Brosnan's face, his face. And Devin Brosnan blocked it with his hand, which is why he had taser marks in his hand. You don't get to assault a police officer and attempt to shoot him in the face and run away and then not go get you. That's just not the way it works. You know, what about somebody who robs a bank? Let them get away. What about somebody who commits another crime? Let them get away. Why does Rayshard Brooks just not comply? And the reason is simple. He was on probation. He didn't want to go back to prison. Everybody knows that. Yeah. He had just been released from jail from Clayton County for violating probation. He didn't want to go back. He's got a violent past, which nobody has talked about, dating back to when he was a teenager, charged as an adult for shooting somebody.
But should he be dead? I mean, it's like you're not saying, oh, he
this isn't a should he be dead question. Obviously, Garrett Rolfe wishes he didn't have to use deadly force. He had, as Director Skandalakis told you, 1 second to decide what to do. 1 second to decide if that's a gun pointed, that's going to be pointed and shot at him, or a taser.
Bill, how close? I get that now it feels as though this was a no-brainer and that, but from a reality standpoint, Garrett Rolfe had to be pretty concerned about his future because, let's face it, out of the gate, within days of this happening, we saw the press conference, the charges were coming, they were going after him. To what extent were you nervous? Was he nervous that he was going to possibly spend some time in prison?
So I think at the outset you said, now this is a no-brainer. That's not accurate. This was a no-brainer from the beginning. So
you're saying that you were never worried? You three were just never worried? I don't believe that. I don't believe that, given that press conference and the way that had things gone differently politically in Fulton County, you should be worried. You should have been worried. At least go through the process. Maybe you're saying that at the end of the day, a jury would have come to this decision.
Rather than you tell me what I was worried about, I'll tell you. I was worried and concerned that Garrett Rolfe was subject to what I believe was a very inappropriate political process. From day one, people, commentators, prosecutors, attorneys representing the family made statements about Garrett Rolfe and what happened that night that were patently false. They did that on day one. I will let you draw your own conclusions as to why they did that, but that was done. And that is not, we knew that then, members of the public did not know that then. The GBI report has borne out what we said, that those statements were patently false. Let me say that again, patently false. Mr. Skandalakis' press conference yesterday reiterated that those statements, that the narrative that were put forth by the district attorney's office, by Paul Howard, and those prosecutors assigned to this case, those statements were patently false. They're recorded. Go back and look at them. Garrett Rolfe never kicked Rayshard Brooks. That never happened, but it was repeated time and time again. At one press conference, an attorney representing the family stated Garrett Rolfe didn't even give Rayshard Brooks a breath access that night, but chose to arrest him for DUI. That's patently false. What, if anything, we were concerned about was that there was a narrative being put forth in this case that simply wasn't true. And all of those people, all of the naysayers yesterday who were disappointed with the decision, who had press time, they didn't address those false statements. We still haven't heard from the former prosecutors who put forth this false narrative about Garrett Rolfe kicking Rayshard Brooks. The narrative in this case should have been officer brutally attacked, forced to use deadly force, does that and administers first aid to the man who seconds earlier had brutally attacked him. That was never the narrative. Had that been the narrative, it would have been the appropriate narrative and nobody would be sitting here tonight. So again, let me reiterate, we were never concerned that at the end of the day, and I don't know what part of the process it would have been had Paul Howard been elected, but at the end of the day, these charges would have never, ever stood up.
Lance, why did it take so long? It's 2 years now, and just after the press conference, Andre Dickens, mayor of Atlanta, was disappointed. People have come out and said, "Oh, they're very upset by this." So what's going on? Why such the disconnect? And how did your client get into the middle of it?
Well, first thing that I'll tell you, that looking back on it, I hate that it took so long, but I'm glad. Now that I sit here, I'm glad that people can see a 100-page report, thousands of pictures, whatever's in that GBI report, whatever's in that expert report. Now people can see that a deliberate amount of time by experts was taken, and not 5 days to investigate a murder trial, probably a day of which took to put together a press conference. You seem very uncomfortable with Garrett Rolfe using deadly force on June 12th, 2020. I'm not. I know the law. I'm a police trainer. I know exactly what an officer is authorized to do. And the game changer here, you said, why didn't they let him go? Because they took an oath to enforce the law. That would have been a dereliction of their duty. The game changer here from minute one, at about 43 or 45 minutes into the contact between two officers and a man who was high on ecstasy, cocaine, and alcohol, was when he chose to violently assault two law enforcement officers. He doesn't have a right to do that. The only thing he had a right to do was submit to an arrest. Now, I want to point something else out to you. There is no telling how many people on June 12th, 2020, across this country got a field sobriety test, were told they were under arrest, went to jail, and bonded out the next day without a single person being hurt, and with the only force being used, the application of handcuffs. The game changer here, and this is what the special prosecutor found, the game changer here was Rayshard Brooks, not the bad training, not the bad motives, not the bad heart of these two officers. The game changer was a man who chose to violently break the law.
Noah Pines, Lance LoRusso, and Bill Thomas going to stick with us. We're going to step aside, take a break. Here is a preview of what's coming up next hour here on Closing Arguments. Tonight on Closing Arguments, in Monterey County, California, decades after Cal Poly freshman Kristen Smart disappeared from her college campus, the longtime prime suspect is standing trial for her murder. Today, the jury heard from another woman who says the defendant, Paul Flores, sexually assaulted her.
In LA's Redondo Beach, Flores was being investigated for rape and was a suspect in 2 more cases of sexual assault.
So we're heartbroken.
confused, but not angry. No person out there should be angry. This isn't a time for unrest or division. This isn't a time to accuse every officer out there of being a bad cop, because that's just not true. There are phenomenal police officers out there in APD and across this country, people we depend on every day for our lives. But we have a responsibility to speak up when something wrong has occurred.
That was Chris Stewart, one of the attorneys for Rayshard Brooks' family, at a press conference yesterday. At that same press conference, Stewart was critical of the moment that Officer Garrett Rolfe used deadly force. Take a listen.
While he was on top of them, they didn't know if he was reaching for a gun or whatever. They could have used deadly force, and I would have backed any officer that did it. But they did not. They did not. They chose not to when they were justified. But they decided to use lethal force as a man was running away 19 feet away.
Still with us, the attorneys representing Garrett Rolfe, Noah Pines, Bill Thomas, and Lance LoRusso. Bill, to you first. Reaction to that statement, which, frankly, a lot of people are concerned with that element of it, the space between them and the fact he was running away.
I think Lance has spoken to the use of deadly force in this particular case. What I wish I would have heard yesterday is someone address the demonstrably false statements that were made by the Rayshard Brooks camp about our client. I wish that I would have heard that yesterday. Chris Stewart is a good attorney. Chris Stewart understands the law. Sometimes attorneys say what they need to say to push their narrative. I've already said, and I stand by it, that the narrative that was pushed in this case by the prosecutors, by the attorneys for Rayshard Brooks, was a false narrative. That was demonstrated yesterday. We made a decision as a team. If you recall, we did very little press on this. We turned down interviews from media outlets throughout the country because we knew that we would be borne out by the facts. I wish that the other attorneys involved in this case had chosen to do that. They didn't. As I sit here today, I am hopeful that the individuals who have taken away 2 years of this man's life will address for the public, will address for their constituency the false narrative that has been pushed, the false statements that have been made by, as Lance has laid out, just a person who is absolutely a fine officer. What you don't know is I was a police officer. I've served with police officers. I've represented police officers. I've worked with police officers, prosecutors. Lance was a prosecutor, and I would have to say that Garrett Rolfe is hands down one of the finest, if not the finest police officer I have ever met. I am proud to have him on the street. I'm glad that he has decided to put back on the uniform. A lot of officers wouldn't have done that after they've gone through this. And really, one of the tragedies here has really been what this man has been put through from day one, when he was really simply doing his job. He acted in accordance with his training. And for 2 years, he's just been put through hell for that.
Noah, why did this happen? How did we get here then? Oh, go ahead.
Where are you getting 19 feet from?
I was repeating what he said in that soundbite, if you were listening to it.
No, I understand. Where does he get 19 feet from?
Oh, I guess they measured it. Yeah, I don't. Was it not 19 feet? How many feet was it?
It's not 19 feet.
Okay, how many feet was it? And
They get this information from Paul Howard, who, I'm going to say, he lied. He lied
Why?
in a press conference. Why did he lie?
Yeah.
Ask him. Ask him. How many, look, Chad, I was a prosecutor for 7+ years. I've been practicing law since 1995. How many times as a prosecutor did we ever take out warrants for somebody? 0. How many times does a district attorney take out warrants for somebody instead of law enforcement? I bet you it is less than 1%. I bet you it's less than 0.5%. So why did Paul Howard do it? Because he was losing his election. That's why he did it. And, you know, I have information that he knew he was giving a false narrative. People in his office told him things weren't true based on the evidence, and he didn't care. I mean, that's crazy. He's still being investigated for illegal use of grand jury subpoenas. He tried to subpoena information using the grand jury when the grand jury wasn't in session. And when asked about that, you can look this up, he gave 3 separate answers. That's who should be answering questions. You know, look, I've charged people with crimes. I've indicted people. I've tried murder cases. I was a child abuse prosecutor. I tried, you know, a bunch of cases. I sent a bunch of people to prison. But I did it based on evidence of guilt, not my own personal political gain.
The attorney representing Rayshard Brooks' family also spoke about the possibility of where this goes from here.
So we're destroyed by the announcement today. And we'll continue our fight in civil court because that seems to be the only place that we can get justice, possibly, depending on the city of Atlanta and its leadership.
Lance, there's threatening civil action. Was that on some level the goal here for the family from the beginning in your mind, or what's your take on that statement?
I have never seen a family and their attorneys involved in a press conference given by a prosecutor. Actually, I can't say that. I saw it 2 weeks before by Paul Howard. But there's something else that you need to, you know, we're living in a city that needs to keep calm. And people need to understand part of the law and the inaccuracy that's been said. So this statement was that, you know, Garrett Rolfe and Devin Brosnan could have used deadly force when they were rolling around on the ground with Rayshard Brooks. That's absolutely correct, okay? But once Rayshard Brooks commits violent felonies against anyone, specifically in this case against law enforcement officers, and he is armed and running, the law absolutely gives them the ability to lawfully use deadly force to take him into custody. This is not a stretch. This is not a unique set of circumstances. And to say that is to absolutely raise the ire. And that's what people are doing right now. A lot of people are calm about this, but people are stoking these fires completely irresponsibly. What Garrett Rolfe did was completely justified by the law.
And Ted, to answer your question about the civil suit, it's already been filed. Chris
Months
Stewart
ago.
already filed one. Yeah, I mean,
Which is not a surprise. I mean, it'd be surprising if they didn't file one.
It's kind of like, we're going to file one. Well, you already did, and there's already a motion to dismiss, you know, which is probably going to be granted by the end of the year based on immunity.
Yesterday's press conference and those statements just continue to push a discredited narrative. I don't know, in all my years of being a prosecutor, that I have seen a case that is more investigated than this one. I mean, everything was looked at, experts were hired, the video was broken down frame by frame, and I think yesterday's press conference by the other side was just a desperate attempt to breathe life into a civil lawsuit that should be dead, and to continue to push a false narrative, to stoke up members of the community who unfortunately don't have the perspective, the training that all of us do as attorneys, that Chris Stewart has as an attorney, because the truth is, in this case, yesterday's decision was absolutely the right decision.
And a lot of other people have it as well. With, you know, from your perspective, Ms. Willis, should this have not been just dropped after that election was over? Howard is out. Should have it just been dropped at that point? I guess that would be another question. And I know your answer. Yes, it should have been.
Well, I think the answer is that it should have been, but
it wasn't, and it lasted 2 years. It took forever from the one from your perspective, and that, I guess, is the political force that was at play here from the very beginning in this case.
Well, I mean,
unfortunately, Paul Howard created a set of circumstances where now this process had to happen. What normally would have happened is the GBI would have come in, conducted an investigation, made a report, and then there would have been a prosecution decision made.
But he jumped in front of the line and went out and pulled the trigger before all of that was done.
And the question that you should be asking, and that Chris Stewart ought to answer, is why was Garrett Rolfe treated differently than every other police officer in the state of Georgia when they're involved in an officer-involved shooting? Somebody needs to answer that. I wish they had answered that question at the press conference. That didn't happen yesterday.
Lance LoRusso, Noah Pines, Bill Thomas, thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to step aside and take a break. When we come back, we'll bring in our legal analysts and law enforcement experts to talk about this big decision in the case of Garrett Rolfe.
Were the officer's actions objectively reasonable? And I think you can also conclude that the arrest warrants on Brosnan, where Brosnan is basically out of it once he has been tased, has been knocked with a concussion, is basically out of it. So we're really looking at the actions not of Brosnan but of Rolfe. And again, given the quickly changing circumstances, was it objectively reasonable that he used deadly force? And we conclude it was.
That was the big announcement coming down yesterday from a specially appointed prosecutor in Georgia that no criminal charges will be made against the officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks 2 years ago at a Wendy's in Atlanta, Georgia. The decision was in stark contrast to a press conference held just 5 days after Rayshard Brooks was killed by then DA Paul Howard, who said both officers would be charged in the shooting. Yesterday, one of the attorneys representing Rayshard Brooks' family mentioned that fact during his own press conference.
What we have now seen, the entire world has seen, is one finding from a district attorney, pictures, exhibits, breakdowns of videos, finding guilt, finding them at fault. And then today, we watch, as a world, as a community, another district attorney or prosecutor finding a totally different result from the same facts. And all of you can understand, no matter what you look like, how that's confusing.
Joining us now in Seattle, Washington, former prosecutor and trial attorney Vonda Sargent, and in Atlanta, Georgia, former special agent in charge with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Treboy Randall. Good evening, ladies. Thank you for your time. Vonda, your reaction to this decision made by the special prosecutor?
I'm not surprised. It's pretty consistent with what goes on in this country. I cannot wrap my mind around how Rayshard Brooks was a threat to this law enforcement officer who ultimately shot him in his back twice as he was running away. I for the life of me, I cannot understand how he was a threat. They had his information, they had his vehicle, they had every means to track him down if in fact they wanted to charge him with the crime of DUI. I don't know any state in this union where driving while under the influence is a penalty of death. If in fact he was, subject to death for fighting, why didn't they kill him when he was on the ground fighting them and not when he was fleeing? So I just have a really hard time with the decision, but I'm not surprised by the decision in the slightest.
Treboy, is a stun gun a deadly weapon? And didn't the game change when he turned and shot that stun gun that he had stolen from the officer at the officer?
Absolutely. So, I always like to start off by saying anytime there's a loss of life, we're deeply saddened by that. It's very unfortunate. And we feel, we're very sad for the family of Rayshard Brooks. But one of the things we haven't mentioned is the law. The agents that come in and do these investigations, people have to remember we're not finders of fault. We are finders of fact. And that's exactly what was done during this investigation. I'm never going to convince a civilian, a citizen who has not had that opportunity to be in a law enforcement officer's shoes, what I was feeling. Did that individual have the ability? Did he have opportunity, and did he have jeopardy? We have to talk about the law and applying the law here, and that's exactly what happened. And the law does allow for deadly force to be used in this situation. I have been that agent that has had to work cases where there was injustice and arrest police officers, but that was not this case. Had I been that officer, that reasonable officer who had a taser pointed at me by someone who had just physically assaulted me, showed their intent to harm me, I would have made the same decision.
Vada?
I take issue with this. We're talking about a taser, not a gun that has 16 or 17 rounds in it. We heard testimony, or not testimony, but his lawyers are saying he was the smartest officer that ever came out of the academy. In fact, the smartest officer, period. It seemed to me that he would know that once the taser has been discharged, it had to be recharged. So it's no longer a threat, it's a plastic implement. So I still am taking issue with this idea that he was in any immediate harm. And looking at the distance between Mr. Brooks and Officer Rolfe, it seems to me that he was in absolutely no peril of being attacked or having any sort of harm placed on him. He might have been angry, he might have been afraid, but that's not a basis to kill somebody. And that's the problem that I think the public, regardless of their background, regardless of whether they have ever been a law enforcement officer, has when they look at this video and they see this man being shot in the back. That's the issue. He's fleeing.
Last word, Trevor, before we go to break.
Again, ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. The law does not require me to say, is this going to hurt? Is he going to hurt me bad? It requires me to enforce the law and make sure I get home at night.
All right, very difficult case, obviously, all around. Vonda Sergeant Trevor Randall, thank you so much for your opinions. And we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Caitlin Armstrong, the woman accused of killing